Hi, Wyoming traveler at Fort Fred Steele State Historic Site in southern Wyoming. The first marker at the site is a colorful map of the fort. Be sure to check it out closely before you begin your tour. Fort Steele was established in 1868 to protect the crews building the Union Pacific Railroad. After completion of the railroad, the fort took on another task, which was to guard the bridge, the railroad bridge, across the North Platte River. Fort Steele, like most Western posts, was an open fort. Unfortunately, not much remains of the fort today. One of the few structures remaining here at Fort Fred Steele is that of the powder magazine. This diagram of the fort was made a few years before it was abandoned. Note the railroad cuts the fort in half. Here are the remains of a railroad cut that was to be a railroad line between Fort Steele, and Denver, Colorado. The line was never completed. Fort Steele was an active military post from 1868 to 1886. This chart highlights the events that the troops at Fort Steele were involved with during its 18-year history. Troops from Fort Steele in 1874 were called out to put down an uprising by the Utes in northern Colorado. And this plaque tells about the Milk Creek Massacre or battle. Major Thornbush was the commander during the uprising by the Utes and was killed at the Battle of Milk River. This is an interesting display. It talks about how the Army served not only to protect travelers and settlers, but also served as a law enforcement. Troops here at Fort Fred Steele in 1871 were called in to quell a Union-inspired riot against Chinese miners and white miners. This plaque commemorates one of the few times in which the Indians actually attacked a military fort. In this case, about several hundred Sioux and Cheyenne were raiding in the area. They proceeded to Fort Fred Steele and ran off with all of the horses and mules, leaving the garrison with no way in which to pursue them. Let's now explore the fort. This is the remains of the sutler's home and store. As you can see, originally there were two wings to the house. Here we can see how the building was added onto. Today, the house serves as a visitors center. You can see this was a nice house. And here, Mark has marked off the walls. And the second room is a tribute to the commerce of Wyoming. And the mining industry, the sheep industry, the lumber industry. The Union Pacific built a house for the bridge tender, whose job it was to watch for the bridge and make sure it was in good repair. Hey, we are now in the bridge tender's house. Not a lot here. This was the front room. And we come here to a small back room. And a information bulletin about the bridge. From his house, the bridge tender had an excellent view of the bridge. And one of his chief duties was, in the event of fire, to make sure it was put out quickly. While this bridge is a steel bridge, the original one was built of wood. This diagram of the fort shows how the railroad divided the fort into two parts. South of the railroad were the quartermaster's buildings and military shops. North of the railroad were the barracks, officer quarters, laundresses' quarters, stable, and hospital. Fort Steele itself lies on the other side of the railroad embankment. This is all that remains of Fort Steele today. When it was abandoned in 1886, it, like all of the western forts, had its property sold and auctioned off, including its buildings. So as we can see, not much remains of Fort Steele. Here are the remains of the enlisted barracks, or one of the enlisted barracks. Here are the remains of another set of barracks. Here are the foundations of another barracks building. The laundresses' quarters were located in the background to the right in the tree line. We're now walking along a part of Officers' Row. Officer homes were two-story frame buildings. Here are some more officer quarters ruins. The houses were probably duplexes. The building here is the quartermaster's office. Now, it would not have originally sat in the middle of Officers Row. The Park Service, the State Park Service, believes that it was moved here when the fort was abandoned and Fort Steele went from being a military fort to a small local community. Inside the fort, or the building, excuse me, are information plaques. See, private's got $13, corporal's $15, sergeant's $17, first sergeant's $22, and an ordnance sergeant $34. The stables and corrals were located behind the white building in the background. This structure was the commanding officer's quarters. As you can see, it is much larger than that of the other officers. The structure in the distance is the schoolhouse, which was operated after the fort was abandoned and Fort Steele was a community. Almost no structures remain of Fort Steele today. However, the post was a military center for almost 20 years, and what there is stands as a testimony to the progressing American frontier.